I'm going to talk a little bit about research from a while back, and then bring you up to speed with some very recent research we've been doing in OPENspace Research Centre, looking at not so much necessarily informing how well landscape architects design, although I hope my research does that, but also making the justification for good landscape architecture to a wider constituency of people interested in the design, the planning and the management of places. So justifying our role within the design of urban environments in particular for an ageing population. Now I know you've all memorised these, but just to really, I show this to underline that the World Health Organization sees UN Sustainable Development Goals as probably the best way of influencing public health going forward. So it's not just about sustainability of individual parts of the system, but linking, for example, good health and well-being, life on land, and sustainable cities and communities. Just one goal under sustainable cities and communities focuses on safe, inclusive, and accessible green and public spaces, particular for women, children, older people, people with disabilities. So there is a really important link here in a global sense that the World Health Organization, among others, is very interested in, and in their development of the WHO Guide on Age-Friendly Cities, they were keen to promote the kind of guidance that some of our research produced. They reference it in their publication because they see these links as important to reinforce. Many of you may be familiar with this diagram, but it just reminds us that with people at the heart, we need to understand what influences well-being at every scale. And obviously there are some areas where the medical and health professions focus very much on the individual, but we as landscape architects are well able to plan and contribute to the quality of the natural environment, the built environment and the activities they afford. We also now know how, perhaps unwittingly, we can influence that wider circle of global ecosystem, biodiversity and climate stability. But we have an important role to play here. And particularly in relation to microclimate, it's something we as landscape architects can make a difference to, the quality of the environment, the livable environment at the local and the livable scale. One of the other things that has been happening recently, and I've been privileged to work with many people, including Matt, who's going to speak to you today, and others, George Morris among them, who've introduced me to how public health people are thinking about an ecological approach to public health, where a return in one sense to the kind of things that people were talking about when they were developing public parks in the 19th century. The idea that everything matters, but the physical environment, the environment in which we lead our everyday lives, can make a big difference to our well-being. And in the context of many of the health challenges of the 21st century, which are particularly in developing countries, or developed countries I should say, around non-communicable diseases, obesity, lack of physical activity, poor mental health, that looking at the environment as ways of supporting good health is absolutely what we need to do, because simply mending people's poor health is not going to be affordable or sustainable into the future. So these quotes, which George Morris has pointed me to, talk about ecological public health as an important part of the 21st century. And of course, from a public health perspective, if you have to pay to support people in ill health, it is much more effective if for a relatively affordable cost you can prevent people becoming ill in the first place. And the environment has a key role to play here, particularly the public environment, because public open space is potentially open to everyone, free at the point of delivery. If that can support everyone's good health, so much the better. I was invited to contribute to this study, and if you're interested in some of the research I talk about, not just my own by any means, then you can get this report off the website for free. So I recommend this if you want a bit of evidence to support the case for more better green space, more better good health too, and a subsequent study which looked at interventions, so very much up our street as landscape architects. What can we do to make a difference to health? What things work or don't Easy to say, very, very hard to research. I can show you the scars later, but one of our studies is here. Some of the research I started on looking at older people's engagement with outdoors is over a decade old now, but just to briefly touch on them before I bring you up to speed. It's not surprising that at every age, but including older age, being in an environment, as Amber has underlined, which makes it easy and enjoyable to get outdoors, means that we're more likely to be physically active. Most of us are more active when we're outdoors than when we're indoors. So if we can get outdoors and it's nice when we are out there, we're more likely to remain physical activity, we're more likely to be healthy and satisfied with life. And the kind of numbers that make it easier to talk to politicians are the simplified version of this. Do you live within 10 minutes walk of a local open space? If you do, and it's a small sample, but a sample over 65, our sample were twice as likely to achieve healthy levels of walking if they were 10 minutes or closer to their local open space than if their nearest open space was further away. And they were more than twice as likely to be satisfied with life. So quality of life in a number of dimensions is associated with having a good local open space. But we also need to be able to get to that open space, and the quality of the environment as we move from our house to a local open space or other venue makes a big difference. Again, making a difference, a factor of 2 or more in terms of achieving levels of healthy walking. And also, very importantly, when we look at accommodation, sheltered accommodation or care homes, there is still not enough focus, and I know Annie will say a bit more about this, but there is still not enough focus not only on providing good outdoor open space, but making it accessible and making the management of the facility and the support and care of individuals so that it is used. Not just that it's hypothetically there, but that it is actually used and people are free to go and enjoy it when they want to. This was some other research, and I'm just skimming on the surface of some of this, very happy to answer questions if you're interested. But choice-based conjoint questionnaire or choice-based conjoint approach is one of those approaches to research that tries to weigh up trade-offs between different variables. We all know that an ideal environment might be one that is accessible, has low volume of traffic, plenty of trees, things to watch, whatever. In practice, we can't necessarily get all of those things right, and part of this research was trying to look at relative importance of different things, all of which mattered to people, but how could we weigh up one thing against another? And we get a dynamic model using choice-based conjoint approaches that allow us to look at trade-offs. So we can think about trees versus traffic, for example. We know that our older participants in research are concerned about heavily trafficked streets, and that can be very off-putting in going out and about. They also like trees. Would they trade trees for traffic? Actually, the traffic is more important in this trade-off. Light traffic really does make a difference in terms of accessible environments. Would you trade facilities, toilets, a cafe, things again that people would like to have for attractive trees within your local park? No. It's actually the tree-lined paths and trees and plants within the local open space that are more attractive, despite the attraction potentially of facilities. And would you trade something aesthetically pleasing for something that is well maintained? Again, both of these are desirable. And the answer in our sample is that people would tolerate slightly lower levels of maintenance in order to have an environment that is more aesthetically pleasing. The attractive environment is more important than the level of maintenance. So these approaches, this research was done a while ago and across the UK, but of course you could take this approach at a much more local level, and allows you to weigh up different scenarios and where to focus interventions most effectively. More recently, we've looked at a pilot Sustrans series of projects called DIY Streets. These were not shared space streets. They were a sort of more modest version of trying to reduce traffic speeds on residential streets and encourage local residents to use the streets for more than just vehicular traffic and parking. We didn't have any involvement in the design of the streets, but we were looking at older people's response to them, so pre-post intervention. Study We found very few significant differences between attitudes and behaviour before and after, as reported by our participants. But one perception that did change as a result of the intervention was, it's easy for me to walk on my street. So the intervention made some difference to these people. They believed it was easier to walk on their street after quite modest changes in the street. This is an interesting one. Many of you, if not all of you, have faced the challenge of safety and lighting. And is the answer just more lighting? No. As far as I'm aware, none of the 7 or 8 different places that we looked at as part of our study changed the street lighting at all. But we found a significant difference pre-post in perceptions that the neighbourhood streets and paths are safe to walk in after dark. I think this is about perceptions of community and not anything to do with levels of lighting. So it's a lesson about what does or doesn't support feelings of safety. In summarising this, before I move on to give you a flavour of our most recent research, we found that there was a positive response among our older participants to reducing the dominance of cars. But for many older people who did have access to a car, not everyone does, being able to park the car outside your house was really psychologically important to support the feeling that you could go out and go where you wanted to, when you wanted to. So some challenges here if we're rearranging the design of our streets to think about accessibility for older people and the psychological importance of feeling that places are accessible. But over a 3-year period, actually, when we looked at wider well-being, quality of life, social engagement outcomes, we found that the wider environment seemed to predict good quality better than just the residential street environment. So these changes at the street level didn't seem to be as important for quality of life as wider qualities of the environment, and these went back to qualities of local open space, parks, safe and enjoyable routes to them, accessible paths and cycleways. So the landscape again coming to the fore in supporting quality of life in older age. We were interested in the idiosyncratic approach that these participants had. What took them outdoors? We're all different things attract us and make us want to go out and about. So we asked people what projects took them outside and how well the quality of the environment supported them doing that and how enjoyable it was. And we found that having more personal projects associated with the outdoors predicted a better quality of life. So having an environment that supported outdoor activity, outdoor behaviour, not surprisingly, was associated with a better quality of life, particularly if it involved contact with natural environment. And slightly counterintuitively, utilitarian projects like having to go to the shops, the things that were the necessities rather than the pleasurable, nice to do things, were associated with a lower quality of life. So people will maybe access the outdoors into very old age if they have to, because they need to, but what enhances quality of life is being able to choose to go out and engage with nature in particular. Our latest project, Mobility, Mood and Place, has been building on this previous research, trying to accentuate the positive. What are the things that enhance health and active ageing? This is the picture that always gets the press interested. One of our PhD students actually wearing the weird headset. This was very experimental, very exploratory. No one had used this kind of mobile EEG measuring headset before with an older population. And we invited participants to go around everyday urban environments and contrasted a busy urban street. We used an area of Leith for this, with Leith Links as an urban park, and with a residential street that had gardens in front, so quieter but more built rather than park. We're still publishing some of this, very complex to analyse. And we also asked people, of course, what they thought and what they felt about their experience. We don't just wire people up. We also are always keen to hear from them what their experience was. But one of the findings was that we see a very heightened demand for attention in a busy urban street, which is what you might expect. Dealing with other people on the pavement, busy traffic, making sure that you can negotiate your way through is quite demanding of our attention. And as we get older, it might make us more vulnerable to falls or hazards. That can be quite tiring. tire us very quickly as we get older. Going into the park, we saw a relaxation, a reduction in the need for attention, which was clearly restorative and in line with attention restoration theory about restorative environments. We also saw a buffering in the reverse, so that when people moved from an urban park into a busy street, they didn't have the same attentional demands. It rather buffeted that stressful need for attention compared with the other way around. We worked on co-created environments. Many of you will be familiar with some of this. I mention our A to Z of co-design not because I expect that many of you need to understand aspects of this. You're probably, most of you, very well informed on that. But it was interesting to us that as we started to work on co-design with local participants in Manchester, in Hackney, in London, in the Orkney Islands, as well as in Edinburgh, that many local facilitators and people who are engaged with older people's groups were very keen to have support for co-design, co-production activities, to know the research that supported it, to have some references to refer to. So this A to Z of co-design that we produced out of our research has actually been very much in demand. And you can get it off our website if you're interested. It's something that might be useful to share with people that you're working with. This is just one example of student project, working with architecture and landscape architecture master's students, where they worked engaging with local groups of older people and understanding what the key messages were. You can see them there: access for all, access to nature, access to light, access to others. Many different and innovative design solutions were produced by the students in discussion with older people. This illustrates just one group of students' design approach, but it underlines something that I often say to non-designers, something we understand but many other people don't, that it's the threshold between indoors and outdoors that can be absolutely the key to accessible outdoor environments as we age. A place where, Jan Gehl has talked about this decades ago, but a place where we can see the outdoors but not necessarily commit. The peristyle, the cloister, is an archetype of this, where we can see the world go by but not necessarily engage if we don't want to, but if we decide we want to go out, we haven't fully risked commitment without getting a sense of what it's like. So a bit of a canopy or cover that allows us to sense the temperature, see, do we need an extra coat or not? Is it too busy? Actually, no, I can retreat, I can watch the world go by, but I don't have to engage. Or is it an opportunity where I can see a place that I would really like to go, a group of people I'd really like to engage with, I'd like to get out there and be part of that society. So that threshold between indoors and outdoors, a key part of design for accessibility in older age. And finally, some research that we've been doing with our health geographers, which we just published very recently, and we think is very innovative. We've been working with the Lothian birth cohort, who are people who were living in Edinburgh and Lothian region, or actually I think in any part of Scotland, age 11, who were born in 1936. They had their IQs tested age 11 in 1947, and who were still living or had returned to live in Lothian and Edinburgh region in their 70s and 80s. And they've been followed up by our psychologists in Edinburgh University to look at cognitive ageing. But what we got a chance to do with these people in their late 70s and early 80s was to ask them where they had lived for every decade of their lives. And where this was in Edinburgh and Lothian region, we then looked at where the green spaces were in childhood, in early adulthood, in late adulthood. We looked at the quality of housing. Many of you will know the Abercrombie Plan, and that published in 1949, so a lot of data there. Some of our geographers went in dusty archives and looked at old sanitary health reports and then digitised the results on old GIS maps. But it means that we're able to look at historic environments and their influence on people's ageing, health, well-being in later life. We think this is a first. It took a lot of work to gather this data, and it is now available to other researchers. Our psychologists are looking at cognitive ageing. That's one of the things they're interested in. What we found was, when we looked at green space, so nearby access to parks, so how close you lived to a local park when you were age 11, when you were in your 20s, midlife and older age. No association with cognitive test score before the age of 70, but over the age of 70, we found there was a positive association. So a particularly sensitive period appears to be childhood. We could predict a slower rate of cognitive ageing once you were over 70 in these participants by how close their green space was when they were a child. So it seems quite astonishing, but very robust. This has been published, and this is enhanced by good access to green space in adulthood. So it's additive, but that childhood period is particularly sensitive. And in common with many other links between access to green space and health and well-being outcomes, we found the link strongest among women and people of lower socioeconomic status. And the other final outcome we looked at was mental health in older age. And looking at anxiety and depression, we know these can be problems for us in our older age, particularly people who are socially isolated. We found a link, the influence limited to the most socially disadvantaged neighbourhoods. We found access to green space during childhood makes a difference. And for anxiety, every decade of life near more green space makes a difference in older age, over 70 years. This has just recently been published as well. So really exciting, interesting information. In summary, a supportive environment, an environment that makes it easy and enjoyable to get outdoors, means we can hope to live to very old age, being active in our local community, getting out and about and having a good quality of life. But we need a supportive environment to make that possible. And we do need to think about the whole life course in terms of influence and quality of life and well-being in older age. And much of the information and the research you can find on our website.
Okay, that's great.